Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our annual conference COSROW training. We're glad to have you all here today. Again, for those of you who are new to COSROW, we want to welcome you to this great body of work that you all will be engaging in. And we hope that today's session will really enlighten you, inspire you, motivate you, and certainly provide you with some great information so that you can have tools for the journey. I want to first introduce myself. For those of you who don't know, I'm Reverend Pamela Purtle, and I am the Senior Director of Leadership Development and Training for the General Commission on the Status and Role of Women. And in my role, I work with all of the COSROW committees across the country and even in other parts of the world to try to ensure that the work of our agency is being carried out throughout the church. I want to welcome you again for being here. We do have our General Secretary with us today. We have Bishop Sharon Rader, who is here with us today, and we're so grateful for her. We have Crystal Jacobson, and we have a few videos from other persons who will also be participating as well. Let me first let you know that though there are several of you that are viewing this event, I do ask that you mute your devices if you're not speaking or asking a question so that everyone will be able to hear whoever the speaker is or the video that might be playing. If you have any questions or problems with technology, Jason Cleese is here with us. He's our webmaster and he will be watching the entire time. And so if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to him through the chat function, or you may have his email as well that he has provided in his name or in his title. So again, I do want to welcome you. If you have any problems with your connection and you get disconnected, by all means, please just go right out and come back in. And I see so many of you are actually doubling up on your devices. That's wonderful. We're hearing that several of you have more than one person there with you, which tells me that your committees are actively engaged in this work and are excited to be here. So we know we appreciate your time. We want to be mindful of our time so we can get moving and get started. So if there'll be nothing else, I'd like us to begin our morning with our devotional and our meditational period. This is with Bishop Cynthia Moore Kokoy.
My name is Cynthia Moore Kokoy, and I had the honor and privilege of serving as one of the bishops of the Western Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Susquehanna annual conferences. I greet you in the name and with the love of Jesus the Christ. Beloved, this season of COVID-19 has been quite the journey, hasn't it? We have all been anxiously awaiting the end of this journey so that we can return to hugging one another and singing together in worship without having to wear a mask. Many of us have been asking that familiar question raised by children all over the world. Are we there yet? We have been asking this question with an increased sense of desperation with each and every passing month. When the first vaccine was approved and we watched people stand in long lines in order to get vaccinated, we asked, are we there yet? When some restaurants began opening back up, we asked, are we there yet? When sporting venues started allowing spectators and when Broadway opened back up, we asked, are we there yet? When some of our churches went back to in-person or at least hybrid worship, we asked, are we there yet? Each time there is a decrease in hospitalizations or deaths, we ask the question, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Has this journey finally come to an end? Beloved, even I, as a natural introvert, am tired of being on this COVID-19 journey. I am weary of being paranoid each time I get a headache or one of my loved ones coughs or sneezes. I'm frustrated that one of my favorite restaurants, because of staffing shortages, is not back to its full menu. I want my slow cooked ribs. I'm weary. And I'm weary of having to do communion, using those little prepackaged cups. I want my communion bread from a common loaf. And I'm tired of the persistent claims by some that the virus is not real. I'm tired of the court battles over whether or not private companies and the government have the right to do what they've always had the right to do. That is, require certain vaccines as a condition of employment. I'm tired of fighting over masks. I'm weary of getting calls or text messages about another clergy person or their spouse being hospitalized because they have a breakthrough COVID case. I'm angry about all of the procedures I have to go through in order to see my mom who's living in a nursing facility. I'm weary of hearing about cultural icons like Colin Powell dying from this disease or its complications. I'm weary of my own family members and loved ones dying from this disease. Friends, I am weary of this journey, and I want this to be over. I want us to get to our destination. I want us to be done with this virus so that we can get back to passing the peace with a holy kiss or hug. Now, my weariness is not only fueled by the grief and pain of this pandemic. If I am to confess to you this morning, it's also fueled by the fact that I'm a product of American culture. In American culture, we have an ethos of being goal-oriented to a fault. If we have a goal in mind, a destination to get to, by golly, we're going to get there no matter what. And we typically don't tend to enjoy the journey. We tend to think of the journey or the process as something we have to endure in order to get to our goal. And so often, we try to rush through the journey or process in order to get to where we want to be on the other side. This ethos is so strong in American culture that some of us are willing to break laws in order to get to the end of our journey more quickly. Our federal prisons are full of people who have tried to shortcut the process. But lest we judge others and not ourselves, let me confess, and I believe I'm not the only person who has driven above the speed limit in order to get to where I wanted to be more quickly. You don't have to say amen. God knows. Now, this hurry up and get there ethos is so prevalent in American culture that we have names for people who are not driven by goals. We call them distractible or scatterbrained. But we don't have such negative names for people who are incessantly goal-driven. Those of us who are American United Methodists can learn a thing or two from our from other cultures in our beloved connection. There are other cultures that value the journey. I've learned a lot about enjoying the journey from my husband, who was born and raised in West African culture. Now, before we leave a gathering of friends and family, he goes to each person to say goodbye. And it doesn't matter what time it is or when we have to be at our next destination, he connects with every person before we leave. There's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I would contend that God leans toward wanting us to go far together. I would suggest to you that the biblical narrative seems to affirm that God is at least equally concerned, if not more concerned about the journey than God is concerned about the destination. We have narrative after narrative of God being with God's people and transforming them while they are on the journey. If we look at the story of Hagar, when she journeyed away from an abusive relationship, if we look at the part of Jacob's narrative when he journeyed from Harmon to Bethel and got into a wrestling match, if we examine the story of Moses when he journeyed to Midian and found an African wife and father-in-law who became a mentor to him, if we read the account of the Samaritan woman who journeyed to a well, if we remember the story of Joseph and Mary who gave birth while on a journey to be counted as part of the census, if we recall the story of the Ethiopian eunuch who was journeying from Jerusalem back home and there received his baptism, if we look at each of these stories, we see that God did some of God's most transformative work while each of these persons was on a journey. While on the journey, some of the journey is very painful, each of these persons was transformed by the Holy Spirit and given gifts and experiences that improved their leadership and empowered them to be more effective witnesses for God. Beloved, as painful as this COVID journey may be, and as much as we all want to get through it quickly so that no more life is lost and no one else has to suffer with long haulers syndrome, as much as we want to get through it, God is with us even in the midst of it, in the midst of our grief and our pain and our loss. God is with us in this journey. And wherever and whenever God is with us, we have the opportunity to be blessed. God does some of God's best blessing work with and through us while we are on the journey. I can testify to the fact that during this COVID journey, God has shown up in some mighty ways throughout our connection. During this journey, God has shaken up some local church leadership and some annual conference leadership and some jurisdictional leadership and forced us to do ministry in new ways. Have you heard? I'm now part of a 2-bishop team, 2 bishops serving 3 annual conferences. Because of this journey, some churches that haven't reached new people in decades have been able to reach new people via internet worship and Bible study or outdoor events. As a result of this journey, some churches have finally decided to offer digital ways of persons to contribute financially to their ministries. And because of the financial stability this has created in the midst of this pandemic, some churches have been able to fund more mercy ministries than ever before and have been able to even help their neighboring churches that are struggling. Because of this journey, some have realized that church is more than a gathering of people in one physical location. In the Western Pennsylvania Annual Conference, a man accepted his salvation because of a Bible study that was posted on a Facebook page. In a small little African American church, they've been able to expand their presence, doubling their worship attendance via a live stream worship service that has now reached a couple of places in Africa. Another church had its largest confirmation class ever because the pastor offered a virtual confirmation opportunity. And another pastor has taken John Wesley's sentiments at heart and is preaching out of the back of his pickup truck. During this journey, our General Conference agencies and committees have been blessed by the opportunity to be challenged by God's prompting them to do things differently. This journey has given some agencies and committees the courage that they needed to dismantle some structures and ways of being that were no longer useful or relevant in our current culture. We're doing some of this work in the General Commission on Religion and Race, and I've read about how you all are doing this work also in GCSRW. So siblings, be encouraged by the ways in which God is showing up and transforming us while we are on this journey. No matter how protracted or challenging or painful this journey is, I promise you that God is with us, guiding us and transforming us. And in the midst of the pain and suffering of this journey, God is loving us and God is blessing us. God will bless us just as God blessed Hagar and Jacob and Moses and the Samaritan woman and Mary and the Ethiopian eunuch. Through this COVID journey, God is transforming and molding and calling and developing leaders for the continuing United Methodist Church. And you are they. I praise God for you and all that God is doing through you and with you during this journey. So, beloved, do not grow weary doing good during this season of COVID. For at the proper time, this journey will end and we will reap a harvest if you do not give up. To God be the glory. Great things God continues to do. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. I think that was a beautiful word to inspire all of us. Thank you so much, Bishop Cynthia Moore Kukoi. What a blessing it was to have her speak something that empowered us. And I know you're like me, you're uplifted, just knowing that God is with us on this journey and that when we come out of this process, we'll be better than we were going in. Amen. Amen. Transformed while on the journey. I'd love that. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to the gathering tools for the journey portion of our session today. And I'm going to ask our General Secretary, Dawn Wiggins-Hare, to speak now, and then she will bring in Bishop Sharon Rader for them to complete this understanding of our agency, our history, and giving you some tools for your toolbox. Dawn?
Thank you, Pam, and thank you for organizing this webinar and this training, and welcome. We usually try to have a quadrennial training. Well, this is the quadrennium that will never end. So we decided we just needed to go ahead and jump in here and do training still during the time of this quadrennium because we know their leadership has changed. And we wanted to share some of the happenings across the church, across Annual Conference COSROWs in hopes that we could all learn best practices and be inspired, because as Bishop Cynthia Moore Kukoi said, this journey continues. And who better to share with us to give you a little bit of the history of the General Commission on the Status and Role of Women than someone who's been there almost from the beginning, Bishop Sharon Rader, my dear friend. Bishop Sharon is, I call her the color commentator, that we're going to walk through a little bit of the history of how the General Commission on Status and Role of Women started, why it was started. And Bishop Sharon is going to help us bring some of the names to life and share some of the stories. So I did want to introduce my friend, Bishop Sharon Rader. Bishop Rader was elected as a bishop in 1992 for the North Central jurisdiction. She was assigned to Wisconsin. She retired in 2004. She was the first executive for the connectional table from 2004 to 2008. And she served as the ecumenical officer for the Council of Bishops from 2008 to 2012. She was a delegate for General Conference for, I think, 3 different times. Is that right, Bishop?
I think that's right, yeah.
But she's going to share with us during today some of the times when she was in the cheap seats watching, even when she wasn't a delegate, because those experiences impacted her and the impression on her, especially as to the inclusion of women. Do you want to say anything as a word of greeting? And I'll pull up our screen for our little time together.
No, but what a great beginning this has been. Bishop Kokoye just set the setting for us. That's just wonderful. And so I'm very grateful for that. And I want to say welcome to all the folks who are joining with us, and to say to them, thank you for continuing this journey as she talked about it, and for recognizing that the work is not done yet. And so we'll continue to hold hands and go forward. Mhm.
Thank you, Bishop. So let's give me a little time to get organized here, because I'm like that. Whoops. Forgive me. Let's try again. There we go. Well, it's still being hateful on me, but we will try our best to see if it will go backwards.
There you go.
Forgive me. There we go. We're being recorded, so this recording will show all my mistakes, and that's okay. So this is Bishop Sharon Zimmerman Rader and myself, Dawn Wiggins here. This presentation has as its kind of background a little book. In fact, I have a copy of it right here in the office. The Journey is Our Home, which is actually the history of the General Commission on the Status and Role of Women. This book was written by Carolyn Henninger-Oler, and together with another book that I just want to commend to you, Words That Hurt, Words That Heal, which is an incredible book that was written by her also. Bishop, I believe you knew Carolyn, isn't that correct?
Yeah, we go back a long way. She and I were actually in college together. We were both young Evangelical United Brethren, women at an Evangelical United Brethren College, North Central College in Naperville, Illinois. So we've gone back that far, but I would just make note that Carolyn was the second president of the Commission on the Status and Role of Women. As the commission began, the first couple presidents were lay women who offered leadership to the church and to this work. So give thanks for that.
Shout out to the laity among us too, right?
There you go, Don.
Thank you. I have to grab those compliments when I can.
There you go.
But I do want to commend the piece that you wrote, Bishop, for us after Carolyn passed away earlier this year, the summer, along with Bishop Shamana. It was a beautiful piece, and it talks about the legacy of both of their leadership in working for the equality of women in the United Methodist Church. It's a beautiful piece, and thank you for sharing that with us.
Well, I'd also like to say that both of those women were not just concerned about women in leadership, though they made significant contributions there. They also dealt with the intersectionality of sexism and racism, both of them, in significant ways. And so I'm grateful for that as well.
So, friends, this work actually goes back to 1944. There was a study called Women in the Church that was prepared by Grace Bragg. She was president of the Women's Division, which was a part of Global Ministries. It's now United Methodist Women. It's now separated and it's its own agency. But in that finding, way back in 1944, there was an analyzation of the Methodist discipline. Remember, this is before we were United Methodist. They found widespread discrimination, found a total lack of opportunity for women, and found these throughout the structures of the church. So that is where this began. And I also, Bishop, this is something you and I have shared. The General Commission on Status and Role of Women was actually birthed from United Methodist Women. So those two organizations are truly sister organizations that have worked hand in hand and continue to. We're actually going to be presenting at Assembly next year. So that the history of those two organizations is critical to our continuing work ahead also.
And I think women, whether clergy or lay, are indebted to United Methodist Women. I mean, sometimes when people say to me, how did you get where you, I have to say, it was because of United Methodist Women who gave me leadership opportunities, who increased my theological perspective, who gave me opportunities to be about mission in new ways and so on. So we don't need to make divisions here. The women's division and COSROW have their own particular work to do, but thank God for United Methodist Women who were willing to kind of step out when other people weren't. So thank you.
Which brings us to 1956. This is when full clergy rights were declared at General Conference for women. In November of 1971, more than 50 women gathered in Wheaton United Methodist Church in Evanston, and this was to organize. Now, Bishop, I think I asked you, you were not at that meeting, is that correct?
No.
But you heard about it, right?
I did hear about it, and more particularly, I heard about it when I started to work with the commission. And these were both. It was a significant number of United Methodist women, and then just some clergy women. Very few clergy women in 1971, but who were beginning to identify that there was a whole lot of work that needed to be done in the church about how to fully include women in not only in leadership, but just in being recognized for the gifts they have to share wherever they're about ministry.
In 1972, Thelma Stevens wrote legislation to establish a quadrennial commission, and that means it was only supposed to last 4 years. And that was the General Commission on the Status and Role of Women. Now, Thelma Stevens had been a name that I've looked at, I've read, but I didn't know who she was. And I reached out in preparation for this presentation to my well, actually, Bishop, you said you didn't know her, but you heard she was a force to be reckoned with. And based on and you said, I think she's from your neck of the woods, Dawn. So I reached out to my friend Bishop Hope Morgan Ward and some others to say, does anybody know of Thelma Stevens? Oh my goodness, what we found out. As Becky Posey Williams would say, everything goes through Mississippi. Thelma was actually a mover and a shaker who worked for civil rights. She was a civil rights activist from Mississippi who worked for racial equality in the schools and in the law. One of the works that she worked on was quoted by Thurgood Marshall in the Brown versus Board of Education. So these stories are important for all of us to continue to read about and to learn. But Thelma Stevens ended up working again at the women's division. She worked out of New York, and she was actually the woman who wrote the legislation for the establishment of the General Commission on the Status and Role of Women.
And she just didn't write the legislation. She did a lot of the behind the scenes, twisting arms and confronting people. And I think I said to you the other day, she was a force to be reckoned with.
Taking it to the streets and the work. That's what we have to do.
Right.
But the reason this passed for our organization was that the General Conference in 1972 found that women were greatly underrepresented. They found they were not included. In fact, they were absent from critical decision-making in the United Methodist Church. Now, I just want to point out right here how much they were absent. There were no clergy women delegates in 1972, even though women had full ordination rights since 1956. The first clergy women were not elected as delegates to General Conference until 1976. So when you looked at the delegation, 1972, there were no clergy women there. The first commission was convened by Bishop Kenneth Copeland. There was a decision to use consensus rather than Robert's rules. And the exceptions would be for the particular matters on personnel, budget, and statements. And again, I want to reiterate, it was only to last 4 years. Now, Bishop, you told me there was something interesting about the organization. When the decision was made in 1972, there wasn't oh, let's get our calendars out and set a time to meet and plan where we're going to meet to organize. It happened a little differently.
And they decided they would just meet. Bishop Copeland decided he would pull together the people that were being elected by the General Conference to be the Commission on the Status and Role of Women. And he convened them at the General Conference. And some of the women weren't at the General Conference, so it made it even more difficult. But those women who were elected to be that first Commission on the Status and Role of Women, they were ready and they were prepared and they knew what they were there to do and what they were there to work on. And there was no nonsense about that. But the thing that was so interesting was that there was just this decision that, Robert's Rules of Order really were established to help with military and warlike situations where you got to make a decision. But the women said, that's not our way. And so we're going to use consensus in terms of making decisions. And some people said, oh, I can't do that, it takes too long, blah, 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 blah. And the women said, no way, we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do it in a different way. And we're gonna bring a new way of decision-making and leadership to the church, which also included, hope I'm not getting ahead of us here.
No,
Dawn,
go ahead.
which also included saying, you don't just have to have one person who's in charge. And so they said, we're going to have what they called a secretariat.
Mm-hmm.
It may have been a new word for all I know. and we're going to have 2 people who will be in charge. And that also means that when they're going into general agency meetings and that sort of thing, there's not just one woman in the room, there's 2 women in the room, and they can provide support for each other and can remind people when women have tried to make a decision or tried to make a contribution that they need to be listened to rather than being dismissed. So it was a very fertile time, and it was like, well, we've never done it like this before.
Which is kind of offers some great out of the box thinking for the journey we're all on right now. There's nothing wrong with never having done it like this before. Just get the courage to go forward. But I do love the fact that there was so much energy that was ready to go forward, that Bishop Kenneth Copeland didn't even wait. It was like, the decision was made. Let's go to a room, let's meet, let's get people going. Let's get this show on the road. Let's get on this journey. Let's don't drag around. So that's a really wonderful part of this story. I do hope for all of y'all in Annual Conference COSROWs that you will explore using consensus. That is a value of COSROW and of our work, to not in your meetings and in every meeting at your annual conference where you can encourage the process of consensus to be used. And if you need training on that, please let us know, because we do offer training on consensus decision-making also.
I can just say that, that is, people say, well, we can't do it, it takes too long, or it's too hard, or whatever. The World Council of Churches uses consensus only, except for significant things where they have to make financial decisions or personnel decisions. But it takes into account different cultures and different genders and sexual orientations and so on, who really come at decision making and thinking in different ways than our traditional white dominated ways of being. And so I think it's very helpful, because it says we're going to listen to everybody before we come to a final decision.
Well, and there's also, Bishop, at least I feel, especially at General Conference, there's a feeling that those who know Robert's Rules are at an advantage and they have a power to play the game almost of strategizing rather than having honest conversations and trying to reach what is the best decision. So it can be a tool that is unfortunately used in ways that are not productive or not in the best interest, I would argue sometimes.
That's right.
Yeah. So let me go back to some of the original things that the commission was supposed to do, and that was to work, and we continue to do, support for women in ordained ministry, to recognize women as competent. Now, remember, this was 1972. Recognize women leaders at all levels of the church. In 1972, there were no women bishops. There were not even women delegates at General Conference. To pioneer humanizing process and liberation of men and women from stereotypical roles, and to free women in church and society. I believe that you were sharing too, Bishop, something that I hadn't fully appreciated was that as women during the 70s in the US began to be freed, they were volunteers in churches and had done things for free. And suddenly churches had to hire people to do that work. And how did that sit?
It didn't. And churches didn't really know what to do. I want to come back to this whole, but there was a lot of emphasis initially about clergy women. I will admit, there was a lot of work that needed to be done, and you've pushed us to the laity matter as well. But we're talking about in 72, women had only been ordained in the United Methodist Church since 56. So we're talking about 16 years. And there's still, there were still bishops in 1972 who were saying, I won't appoint women. Wow. Churches don't want them and I won't appoint them. And there were conferences where women were getting appointed. And so some women were jumping from one conference to another and saying, it's more hospitable over here and I will go over here and so on. I will say I graduated from seminary in 1976. And the first congregation that the bishop tried to appoint me to said, we won't take her. So that's 1976. Well, that's 40 some years ago now, but 40 some years ago isn't all that long ago, friends. We think now, if a woman needs to be appointed to a congregation or to some other leadership role in the church, well, of course, if she's competent and got the skills, why, let's go. But that wasn't true then. And so it was very hard for those initial women, and many of them were angry for what they had to go through. Many of them got depressed because there just wasn't any acceptance. People thought they could talk about the way we dressed and the way we cut our hair and the way we lived our lives, and should we be pastors if we had children, and on goes the list. And all of that was very much present in those early days. And the commission was trying to address that and challenge that and say, women are competent. Women do have, in the first parish that I was appointed to in 1976, they were a wonderful congregation. And they said to me, we want to be sure you're still being a good wife and mother as you're being a pastor here. I thanked them for that. And then I asked them, have you ever said that to any of your male pastors?
Great question.
Dead silence. So in some ways we brought new ways of thinking. In other ways, it was like, get back into your old traditional roles. And and there was just a lot of work that needed to be done. And, and to quote Cynthia from earlier in this, we're still saying, are we there yet?
Oh, absolutely, Bishop. I had a district superintendent. It is rare that I don't have, it's a rare year that I do not have a district superintendent call me and ask, do I have advice on how to deal with a congregation that does not want to accept a woman pastor.
Mhm.
And I think that I do believe that we took a survey right now, today in 2021, of district superintendents across the US and around the world, the numbers would even be higher. But in the US, that every one of them, I would dare say over 90%, would have run into interference in trying to appoint a woman. That just, there's no doubt in my mind. I mean,
The
just
place
no.
where it doesn't happen quite as often is when you've got a woman district superintendent and a woman bishop. I mean, when they start saying, we don't want a woman, it's like, who are you going to complain to? You got to complain to another woman? Okay.
But it happens even then. The other thing that the commission was initially organized for, and these are all items, as you say, Bishop, that we're continuing to work on, was to broaden women's visions in the local congregation to work for equal pay for equal work. We're going to talk about that more later today. That is a continuing struggle for clergy women to be paid equally with men, with clergy men, to accept women without stereotyping. Although I have to say, thinking about the question you were asked, it should be asked for men too. We do want clergymen to have healthy families and to be in a good place. That's important for boundaries. But it very clearly was a sexist question, but it should be something, if we are caring for those who are shepherding us, that we should be asking the question of everyone. To sharing images and feelings as sexual persons, and to expose places in the church where there has been hurt because of sexism. And that work too continues. So let me share with you some of the organizing principles, and these are very interesting. Now, again, we're at 72. The commission was supposed to do and collect research, and we continue to do that. And in fact, if you go to our website, and Jen's going to be sharing some of that with you later, Women by the Numbers is a section of our research that's happened over the years about clergy women and lay women and women who have been victims of sexual misconduct. Lots of numbers there. Those numbers have even been used for grant research and writing by clergy women in seminary. To understand theology and biblical history affecting women. I just have to ask you, Bishop, in 1972, did you have resources that looked at language, that looked at theology from a feminine perspective?
Well, not very many, not very much. You know, one of the wonderful women that had been around for a while was Georgia Harkness. And she was, you know, in 1956, when the decision was made to ordain women, Harkness had been working on that for years. And she was literally the first woman to attain full professorship in an American theological school. And it was at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary up here in Evanston, where I live. And I can't imagine how lonely it must have been for her to go to all these theological conferences and so on. But she wrote, and she believed that theology shouldn't just be for the theologians, it ought to be for the lay people as well. And so she wrote in ways, you know, what do we think about God? What do we think about grace? What do we think, in ways that it was accessible to all kinds of people? But she was also very committed to getting people trained and included and so on. And she believed that women ought to be ordained and have full membership in the annual conferences. So when that was decided in 1956, people were so aware of how much work she had put into it. The General Conference, at the General Conference, gave her a standing ovation.
Really?
Right. When the vote was taken and it was adopted, Georgia Harkness, sitting up in the balcony, got a standing ovation.
I never knew that. That is just awesome.
I'll give you some books on Georgia Harkness. She's
Well, and I always hearken the red shoes as clergy women are and laity. I've been known to put on a pair of red shoes myself.
Yeah, but that was because I think it was her father.
That's right.
Married a woman who refused to kind of stay in gray clothes and, be proper and so on. And the woman had a red coat that she wore, and they were literally asked to leave the church denomination that they were part of because she was just too flamboyant and too worldly. And the Methodist Church accepted them. So that red coat has now been translated into red shoes, which are a little easier.
A little easier to find.
There you go. There you go.
So let me keep moving us. We have too much fun talking, as you can all see. When Bishop and I get together, it's a chat waiting to happen. Yeah. So, but G. COSROW worked for ensuring the full participation of women that were employed by the church and lay women also, and to help develop an understanding of the changing lifestyles, which is what we were talking about before. There was also the establishment early on of a talent bank. This was established to assist groups within the church seeking women for employment and leadership. And Bishop, you were actually the first staff person to manage that talent bank. Why don't you tell us about that?
Well, I was in seminary at Garrett Evangelical, and they these two women who were the secretariat, who were not only providing all the leadership and the vision and all that other kind of stuff for what the commission was doing, they were also doing all the secretarial work, answering the phones, going and buying the stamps to put on the envelopes, folding the well, anyway, they had more work than they could manage, and they found enough money to say one of our jobs is to do some research and so on. And at that point in time, until those two women were made the secretariat, all the other general secretaries were men. And they were saying, and the Nan Self and Judy Leeming-Elmer, who were this general secretariat, said, and began looking at the general agencies, and most of the general agencies only were hiring men. And the general secretaries said to Nan and to Judy, well, we would hire women, but we can't find them. We don't know where they are. We don't, are there women who are trained to do these jobs?
Wow. Yeah.
Right. So they hired me, a lowly theological student, to research and develop a bank of women who would make themselves available if it was appropriate for them to have jobs. So we put the word out all across, I must admit, all across the United States. And said, if you're a woman who has some skills, who has experience, etc., that might be appropriate for general agency work, let us know and tell us who you are and what you know and so on. Well, we put together a big, thick notebook of women who said they would do that. And then I went with Judy and with Nan to a general secretary's table meeting, and we had notebooks for every one of those general secretaries. Don't tell us again that you can't find the women. Here's a whole bunch of them that you might want to take a look at to see if they would be appropriate for your agencies and so on. It took us about a year and a half to pull that all together, but it became a resource and an argument that said there are women who are willing, there are women who are capable, there are women who have the experience and so on, and let's include women in the leadership of the church as well.
Bishop, that work was incredible. And to those of you on the webinar, I just want you to see that this work is still relevant today and can translate into your own church, the local church, into the district, into your annual conference, into your jurisdictional conference, to be sure to sit there and say, who are the women in our congregation who have abilities as trustees, who have abilities as in finance? Let's don't think of women just to be on administrative council overseeing the nursery or overseeing the traditional female roles, because that can happen even today. Think about a talent bank. Put your heads together, get suggestions from local churches. Take that to the nominations committee. Hand them a book, whether it's a digital or a hard book. Hand them a book at your annual conference. Here is a list of women across our annual conference who have skills, gifts, they're ready, willing, and able to serve. So this is, Bishop, thank you for doing that initial work, even as a student, but it is work that the importance of it continues today. So I want to tell you that remember in 1976, General Conference was in Portland. It was just a couple of years ago too. And COSROW was at that time, remember it was only supposed to be a quadrennial commission. Well, there was still work to be done in 1976. And in 1976, it became a full agency of the church. 21% of the delegates were female, and the first clergy women delegates to a United Methodist General Conference were at this General Conference. And just a fun fact, at General Conference in 2016, we prepared a video that was shown at General Conference honoring the 40th anniversary of the ordination of women. And one of the points we made is how it took 20 years to elect clergy women as delegates to General Conference. Featured on that video is Bishop Sharon Brown Christopher, who was one of those first clergy women. It's a really, I'm really proud of that. Were you there, Bishop?
I was there. I was still a student at Garrett Evangelical, and Garrett Evangelical sponsored a team of students to go and to observe and see how the church operated and all of that. And I can remember the opening worship service of that General Conference in Portland, when there's a big worship service and all the bishops parade in. Process in would be the proper term. And every one of the bishops was in a black robe, and every one of the bishops was a man. And I had just been refused by this little congregation in the city of Chicago to be their pastor. And I thought, how can I blame this little congregation for not accepting me? Look at the leadership of the church, you know? In the leadership, we still haven't embraced all these people as well. I would say one other thing about that 1976 General Conference, where there were these women who became delegates. One of the things the commission did, just to make a point and to say thank you and so on, was that there was a day when the women were to be recognized. And so the commission went out and bought yellow roses and put a vase with a yellow rose on the desk of every woman delegate to the General Conference. And it was quite a powerful statement that that said, we're making progress, but we're not done yet. We're not there yet.
Wow, I had heard something about yellow roses, but I never knew the full story. So thank you, Bishop. We may have to revive that tradition coming up. We'll have to see what our budget looks like before we can commit to that one. So in 1980, for the very first time, there was conversation and actually a petition to General Conference that there be a study about the male-oriented nature of language referring to God, and the General Commission petitioned General Conference to study how the language of that male-oriented language was just the given, the constant. Do you remember those days, Bishop? I mean, I'm sure that.
Oh my. But you know, let's be honest. We're still in those. Traumatic times yet today about language. We get into a whole discussion about language that's being used in the United States today that people want to argue about and so on. But when you begin to talk about who God is and talk about the nature of God, and begin to use language that's not the traditional language that you grew up with, or thinking about God in ways that you'd never thought about God before, it just set a flame, a fire in a whole lot of places. And it was like, you will not talk about God, in any other way but Father. You will not talk about it. And so it's interesting to me in the church where my husband and I worship now, just without any announcement or anything else, the pastors in leading worship, I've noticed in the last 6 months, have once again begun praying the Lord's Prayer every Sunday morning with our Father and Mother who art in heaven. And you watch people stumble just to get a perspective that God is bigger than one gender. And we need to keep expanding. Somebody said that if you think you know who God is, your God is too small.
Absolutely.
So,
and I want to invite those on the webinar too. There's a wonderful resource that last quadrennium was put together by the General Commission, entitled God of the Bible. It's a free resource that's downloadable. It's actually a 5-week course, a small group course, and it talks about the many wonderful metaphors in the Bible for language and not all male language. In fact, it's much richer. Lots of female imagery, mother hen, lots of different references. That's the richness of God. That's exactly right, Bishop. I totally agree with you that if you think you can define God, you're thinking too small. You need to expand your thinking. So thank you for sharing that with us. And this leads me to one of the exciting moments that I wanted you to share with us. In 1980, in July, the first woman was elected to the episcopacy, Marjorie Swank Matthews, and our time together would not be complete without your sharing with us how Bishop Matthews was elected. What went into that?
Well, Marjorie Matthews was a district superintendent in the annual conference, West Michigan Conference, that I was part of. So I had known her before she got elected bishop. And she was a second career woman who had she'd been an office administrator and so on in corporation, and thought she was going to become a missionary, and then had other experiences that led her to become a pastor. And Bishop Dwight Loader saw the gifts that she had, and there had not been, I think there were fewer than 10 women district superintendents in the whole United Methodist Church in the late 70s. But he saw in her leadership capabilities and so on, and he made her a district superintendent. Marjorie was, she was in her 60s or more when she became a district superintendent. She was a tiny woman, less than 5 feet tall. And at some point in the late 70s, there were a group of women, particularly in the United States, well, starting in Michigan, but then in the United States at a clergy women's consultation that the commission sponsored, who began to say, there she is. She's got experience. She has a PhD in Hebrew scriptures. She can preach. She's not afraid. and she doesn't threaten anybody. She makes no bones about the fact that she's a grandmother and all that other kind of stuff. And maybe she's the one we need to help us break through this ceiling that said women can't be bishops. So the women really went to work, and there were men who were very helpful too. I can remember sitting in one meeting where somebody said, gosh, if Marjorie was just as tall as Sharon, it would be a big help in this whole thing. Because in those days we said, a person who's tall and whatever has more authority than a little short person. So anyway, we got to 1980 and the women and a whole lot of men began to say, it's time. And the jurisdictional conference was held in Dayton, Ohio, and it was a very difficult election process that year. They elected one white male right off the top, and then we went on and on and on and on. And the contract actually to stay in the convention center was about to run out. And the bishops were saying, folks, you got to hurry up and make this election. We can't, until finally somebody stood up and said, we've got these two people, we can't figure out who to elect first and who to elect second. Let's just elect them both at the same time. There was a question about whether that was legal, but it was done. And immediately, the place just erupts. I was a reserve delegate. I graduated from seminary in 76. Now it's 1980, and I'm a reserve delegate to the jurisdictional conference. And I'd been sitting up in the balcony. And Marjorie was elected, and they swoop her up to the platform. And one of the delegates in the West Michigan Conference turned around from where he was standing, looked at me up in the balcony with tears running down my face. A woman has been elected. And he just motioned to me, Sharon, come down here. And I left my place in the balcony and went down and sat in the chair that Marjorie had been sitting in and joined.
Wow.
So that was the way that happened. And so they went through all the brouhaha about her being elected. And I went up to the platform to give her a hug. And she said, Sharon, I got to go to a press conference. Everybody wants to talk to me and so on. Emerson Kolaw was also elected, and that was the second person that was elected. He always said he was a footnote to Marjorie Matthews' history. And she said, you need to go back to the hotel for me. I need a change of clothes and I need my robe, because in an hour and a half, we're going to have the consecration service. So I went back to the hotel. She gave me her key, and I went into her room, and I found the dress she wanted to wear, and I found her robe, and I carried them back to the convention center. And somebody else went out and found a sandwich for her to eat. And then she proceeded to get ready to be consecrated. And she said, where are my shoes? And I said, you didn't want me to bring any shoes. And she said, well, okay. And she just been, as you do when you're a delegate, you're comfortable. She'd been wearing these kind of ropey sandals. And that's what she was consecrated in. And I will never forget when they, in the consecration service, why they have beautiful stoles that they give you that are Episcopal stoles. Well, everybody assumed that bishops were tall and whatever, and they put this stole on Marjorie, and it came down, and it went down her front, and it went right across the floor. So it was a wonderful, wonderful time of just celebrating that kind of break through the ceiling of prohibition for women as bishops. And interestingly enough, she was assigned to the Wisconsin Conference to be the bishop there, and she could only serve for 4 years. That was another reason she was a good candidate, because if it didn't work for 4 years, well, you hadn't committed to a lifelong kind of thing, and it wasn't but just a few years later when I was elected, and I was sent to Wisconsin as their second woman bishop. So,
Bishop, thank you for that wonderful story. Friends,
we're going long, Don.
I know, I'm going to stop right here. I'm going to stop. What I want to recommend to all of you, 2 incredible resources. One is a book called Leading Women, which was the history. It was a compilation of the stories of the women bishops. It was about the first 16 who were elected. Bishop Judy Craig put that collection together. And then 2 years ago, I guess 3 years ago now, our own Bishop Rader and Margaret Ann Crane did a compilation of the stories of all of our current women bishops, called Women Bishops of the United Methodist Church, Extraordinary Gifts of the Spirit. This goes through from that first beginning when Bishop when Bishop Marjorie Matthews was elected, all the way until the historic election of 4 African-American women, including Bishop Cynthia Moy Kokoy, who began our day. And they were all 4 elected in 2016, which was another historic event. First African-American woman elected in the Southeastern jurisdiction. Her story, Bishop Karen Oliveto, who was historic in her election also. All of those stories are in the Women Bishops of the United Methodist Church. And Bishop, we thank you and Margaret Ann so much for compiling those stories and writing those stories. And I want to recommend that as a resource for all of y'all. And we're going to end because it's time. We're going over our time. The other slides that I had to share with you concerned our work of the chargeable offenses in our sexual misconduct work, but Becky's going to be addressing that later on. So with that, I will say a big thank you to my dear friend, Bishop Sharon Rader, for the richness of this morning. I will treasure it in my heart forever. And Pam, we'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Dawn.
Wow, what a rich, rich story you two have shared with us about our history. Exciting. Awesome. Bishop Rader, thank you so much for being with us. This was awesome. And I even learned some things that I didn't know, and that was quite interesting. I want to give everybody just a moment to stretch. So we were going to just take a quick little 2-minute break here, just to give you a moment to stand up, move around, maybe take a restroom break if you need to. Make it a little bit more than 2 minutes. Let's come back. I have 11:09 Central Daylight Time. Let's come back in about 3 minutes, 11:12, and then we'll get started with a presentation by Crystal Jacobson. So I will give you just a few minutes to rest, and then we'll be right back. Okay, well, I hope you all have had a chance to get a cup of coffee or a bottle of water or something to refresh yourselves as we move into strategies for the journey. And though this is looking at the road before us and what we can do with our annual conference COSROWs to be able to improve our work and to make it more effective. So I'd like to invite Crystal Jacobson to come before us now. She's the chair of the Indiana Annual Conference COSROW. Crystal, I hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be with you all today. I also have some screens or slides to share, so I'm going to change that over so you can see those as I speak. All right. So I'm Crystal Jacobson. I serve as the COSROW director of the Indiana Conference. I started in 2020, right before Annual Conference. And COSROW in Indiana had been defunct for about a decade when they called me to see if I would do this. So we were kind of starting from scratch. So the first thing that I did, see if I can get to the next slide, there we go, was to look up General COSROW's website. And on that very first page, they had these areas of focus. So I started using those as a framework for what we could do in Indiana. I also contacted Pam and Becky, and they got me a great packet of resources to start with. And then the next step I took was to contact a retired elder in the Indiana Conference and just kind of get some of the history of what COSROW had been here in our state. And she shared with me some really valuable information. She told me that at one point, COSROW had become a good old girls club, and that there was a lot of, you young women don't even know what we had to go through. You have it so easy kind of conversations. So immediately I knew that, like, in Indiana, we really need to work on welcoming and involving as many as possible. and to really make inclusion a central part of what we did here in Indiana. Then I started asking for help, and we did that through a Google form with, I think it was like 5 or 6 questions on it. We created this Google form and then sent it out through the conference email, asking for volunteers to help with projects. And those projects were asking for some long-term help, but also short-term help. If anyone was interested in helping in one specific area, what they would be willing to do. And we got about 20 responses from that Google form. So this gave me a group of volunteers to start working with right away. So our first project was to create a Facebook group where we could focus on those 3 areas of resources. So we had monitoring inclusion as one of those, sexual ethics, and education and leadership. In the general COSROWs page, education and leadership are divided into 2 separate areas. We decided to kind of combine them and use that to spotlight women who are doing amazing work in Indiana. So these were our 3 areas, and our idea with the Facebook group was that we wanted to give a slow drip of resources of smaller projects and to get people excited about what COSROW was doing. If we could provide 1 resource a month in each of these areas, then we could build some interest and momentum for change. So this is what we have done in these 3 areas this last year. And monitoring inclusion, we've done some graphs and statistical information around a point of cabinet report that we created. We've also monitored Annual Conference for the first time and shared information about that. And we were able to create a list of churches that have never had a woman lead pastor, whether that's a large church or a smaller church. Then in sexual ethics, we've been doing a lot of stuff in Indiana. A couple things that we didn't put on our Facebook page. Along with help from the conference, we've created care and response teams to help in the complaint process. And then we've also looked at safe sanctuary trainings and helped the conference to think of better resources for training churches with their volunteers to make sure there's no sexual misconduct. But then on the Facebook page, we actually started pointing out some sexism that pastors face here in Indiana. We also started sharing a lot of the general COSROW resources, including the complaint process and other things that they have available on their website. And then around education and leadership, as I already shared, we started doing spotlights of women leaders. And this was around knowing that, like in Indiana, we already have great women leaders. We don't have to go searching out for them somewhere else. They're here already. We just need to recognize them and get them into those positions where we're really using their leadership to the best of our ability. So in December 2020, we started this private Facebook group and started inviting people. And that slow drip of information has really paid off in Indiana. There's almost always comments and conversation around our post. Sometimes these comments are ideas for a next monitoring project or naming other issues we need to tackle. Sometimes it's clergy women will reach out to me and they'll tag me in like a friend's post or something that they found, and just say this, we think this would be a great resource to share on COSROW's page. So we've been able to like really get excitement and build community within that group. And when we've wanted to do bigger projects that we need more people to help with, we have this pool of people that we know care about COSROW and are willing to help out a little bit. So every time I think that we've gotten to the point of not having anything to post, God answers and something comes up, which has been really exciting to see how it's become kind of fed by the grassroots and the people who are part of that. I also want to share a little bit about our structure for volunteers. So the way that we have it kind of set up, we have this group of Facebook people, that's about 200 people who we know are supportive and they'll help out a little bit and give us some ideas at the base. And then we have about 25 people receiving that monthly email that we send out to our volunteers. And we know those people are willing to help out, especially with smaller projects that we can get done fairly quickly. So those are kind of our workers, our people who are doing the work. And then just in 2021, Annual Conference Nominations Committee gave us a steering committee, which I'm really excited about working with. The folks in that committee, we're looking at larger systemic issues. Right now, we are actually working with the conference. The bishop has asked us to look at creating some strategies around some of the sexism within our appointment system that exists in Indiana. And so that steering committee is actually coming up with longer term strategies and bigger projects beyond what would be a Facebook post. I'm really excited about the work they're doing. And then at the top, we have General COSROW. These are our professionals that we reach out to when we have questions or need support in some way. And we just really use the resources that they have. They have a lot of stuff on their website, so we try to use that whenever possible. So this is a good time to pause for a second and see, Pam, are there any questions about anything so far? Oops, sorry, I got ahead of myself.
I think you can just keep going for right now. Nothing's popping up yet.
All right, that sounds good. Well, Pam also asked me to share a little bit about one of our projects that we've done in monitoring inclusion. And in Indiana, we have a problem where we're not in agreement on what the problems are. So the women have long said there are not enough women serving large churches. And the men kind of respond, well, we've given you two of our biggest churches. We don't understand what you're complaining about. So our COSROW team decided to look into that a little bit more and see what we could see if it was really true to start with, and then what we could do about it. So we want to do a larger project to see what was happening within the system and how many people really were serving larger churches, how many women were. So this was going to be a monitoring inclusion project, but then we were hopeful that as we shared this with a point of cabinet, our spotlights of women could kind of come behind this and say, hey, we have these women who exist already, who can do this work, who are competent, that you can put in these positions that are not being filled by women right now. So we started looking, and we asked, and I asked, and I kept being told there was no database available with this kind of information. Now, I knew that wasn't true. And I knew that there was a conference database that had the information we needed around sizes of churches and the women who serve them, but I was not going to get access to that. So we found these two reports, and these two reports were actually shared at Annual Conference 2020. They were public information. So what we did was we took this tithe report, which says the tithable income reported in by every church in the conference. We copied and pasted it into our own spreadsheet. And then we looked at our appointment list. So we had a list of all of the pastors of every single church, and we filled in who the pastors were and what their gender was, so that we created for ourselves our own spreadsheet of information that looked like this. And then we kind of divided the spreadsheet into categories. So if you notice on this spreadsheet, that first category of orange churches, they are all the churches within Indiana that have a tithable income of over $1 million. And we were able to figure out who the pastors were. We also discovered in this first category, there were just 3 women who were serving those churches. So we had all of this data, we could divide it into sections. So we took all of this information and we made it usable for our appointive cabinet. And we made some charts for them within a letter to appointive cabinet to guide them during appointment season that starts in January. And those reports look like this. So you'll notice that in these reports, we have that this last column is the number of women that COSROW was recommending within each of those categories. So for our leadership, we recommended 50% of all the conference leadership should be women. And then in our pastoral leadership, the number of women who are pastors in Indiana is about 30%. So our recommended number of women ended being about 30%, what 30% would be for them. So the reason we did this breakdown was we wanted to make it as easy as possible for a point of cabinet to have a goal in each of those areas, to appoint the women that needed to be appointed there. And so this made it really easy. They could just say, hey, we need to have, whatever number that is. So, so we did it for ordained clergy. We also did it for our non-ordained and retired pastors, which were more of our part-time positions. A couple of them are, or some of them are full-time. So we tried to include that too, but did that division. The reason we wanted to make sure to kind of show that division a little bit is that we have quite a few women elders who are making that last bracket, that, in those smallest churches that can afford an elder. And then when that's the highest bracket for our local licensed pastors, we have a lot of women. So we wanted to break it up so that you could kind of see where our elders were not being treated fairly as women. So this is what we shared with the point of cabinet. And what was really exciting about this is that it worked. We shared this report with our point of cabinet, and we immediately knew that they were paying attention to it and that they were using it. And we knew that because they appointed all of the new cabinet positions, and all of the leadership at the conference level were women, which is super, super exciting. So it evened out that bar a lot. And what's even cooler is that we even got a young woman of color into the conference office, which she has been doing an amazing job. And it's so exciting to have that diversity in Indiana. Also, we know it worked because they asked for it again in 2021. So, so we're really excited about that. One of the other cool things that happened in the preparation for this report was we were able to share this report with a woman in the conference office, one of our directors, and we shared this report with her. She's the leadership of conferences leadership development director. We shared this information with her, and she was like, well, we have a database with all this information. And she opened the door for us to work with the administrative assistants at the conference level to access that database for information that we needed. Now, I will say it was really annoying at the moment because we had just done all this legwork, and now we had a resource that could do it way faster. But you use what you have when you have it. And the good news is, because that door was opened, it stayed open. So this year, as we prepare that report, we have support and help to create the report. So we're not having to do all the legwork this year. So that's been really exciting to do. So these reports that we had shared with the point of cabinet, we also shared in that Facebook group to share just some of the statistics and information we had about the conference. So we took those reports and we made them more accessible for the people who are larger base, who are part of that group. And we created graphs that look like this, so you could see how close we were to where we were aiming and see the difference in women in leadership. So we shared one of these once a month in the spring after we had sent the report on to a point of cabinet. So that's a little bit about one of our monitoring projects that I wanted to share with you. And then I'm going to check back with Pam and see if there were any questions that came up.
Oh, no, I don't think there are any questions. I think we're quite fascinated by how much detail you all have put into your work. You've got about 5 minutes more, so I want you to get through your process. And at the end, if there are any questions, we'll see if we have a moment to take a few.
Sure. So the last part that Pam wanted me to share was a little bit about what we're dreaming about in Indiana. And as I sat down to think about that question, it's a big question. First, I thought about all that we have done And I'm really excited of all the things we've been able to do. We were able to get these recommendations to a point of cabinet. We were able to monitor annual conference for the first time in a long time. And that project only took 3 people. So you don't have to have like a huge group of people to make a project work sometimes. So I wanted to share that with you too. We've been able to create a list of churches that have never had a woman pastor in Indiana or have never had a lead woman pastor. We've been able to create spotlights of women at all levels of leadership in Indiana. And then we've been able to help with these CART teams that our conference has been working on. We've been able to support the conference and coming up with better safe sanctuary resources. And now we're working on figuring out how to dismantle some of the sexism within our appointment system in Indiana with the bishop's help, which is amazing. And we've started a relationship with UMW, which I am really excited about. I know everyone has different opinions about UMW. I love UMW because those ladies get things done and they don't wait for permission. So they have all kinds of resources that I don't have as a pastor and all kinds of skill sets I don't have. So they're really helping us think forward. So our dreams, I want to start when we talk about dreams in Indiana, start with what our steering committee is dreaming about. They're looking into creating a pipeline for women called into ministry. And this is, exactly what Dawn and the bishop were talking about earlier, about, having that group of women who we know have the abilities and are competent and can take those places. We're also looking into a more just appointment system. And we're talking about a women's conference once we get past COVID. The women's conference, I shared with my steering committee right away, that is not my wheelhouse. And, I'm going to need help with that. And right away, our UMW lay women were like, oh, UMW can do that in their sleep. This is one of those things where you should really partner with UMW. So we're really excited about partnering with them for a women's conference. And then my dreams for Indiana, I have a lot of them. Indiana's never had a woman bishop. We've never had a woman from Indiana elected bishop. So those are the top of my dream boards. Also, how awesome would it be to have every church having been led by a woman pastor at some point? That it would be so exciting. Also, right now we have 30% of our women are pastors, or 30% of our pastors are women. And how awesome would it be if that was more, if it was at least 50%, if not more than that. And I think one of our dreams across the board is that women are paid fairly, which I know some other conferences, you guys have been working on that and have some great ideas around that. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about what you guys are doing and how you're dismantling that. So Dawn, that's all I have to share from my neck of the woods over here in Indiana today.
Wow, Crystal, you all are doing amazing, amazing work. And we are so grateful that you were here today to share some of what you're doing. And we asked her to come because we thought she might be able to inspire some of you who are just starting on this journey for preparing your COSROW, or if you haven't been very active or need some more ideas, we really do hope that you were able to gain some insight. Does anyone have any questions for Crystal on any of the projects that she just mentioned? Anything burning that you just want to say, how did you get that started, or who did you use to do this, or what kind of programming are you guys working with? Is there anything else you want to ask, or is there I'm trying to read the chat. Oh, they want to give you a mic drop, Crystal.
Well, thank you guys all. It's been such an honor to be here today. And I am still learning so much. Sometimes people ask me questions. I'm like, I haven't even thought of that question yet. So I just am so appreciative. I know I've met some of the other annual conference directors, and you guys have such amazing skill sets, and the work that you are doing is so valuable. So I just really want to encourage you to keep pressing forward.
Okay. Sarah had a question about can you name a specific goal when you say more just appointment system? Do you want to answer that for her? What specifically
Yeah.
do you mean?
So one of the projects that we had done is kind of just taken, invited women to share, what would you tell the bishop if you weren't afraid to share anything with the bishop? What would you like to share? And a lot of those things were about appointment system and some things that are frustrations for women within the appointment system. So we shared that in a letter to the bishop, and I ended up having a long conversation where the bishop said some of the kind of tropes that we often hear. But what happened was, after that conversation, which was a really good and healthy conversation, he asked some people in his conference office to follow up and create some strategies to really break down the sexism within those systems. So we have been talking about what we can do as a steering committee within that. Part of that is the idea of pipeline. Part of that is evaluations. Right now we do self-evaluations in Indiana. And one of our laity who does evaluations for her corporate job said self-evaluations, women always are more critical on a self-evaluation than men are. So they're not a good measure of where your leadership really is and how good they are. So we've been bringing that up and talking about how that might be a strategy of finding a different, healthier way to do evaluations.
Okay, so someone asked about your charts. Who did those for you? They look so professional.
Oh, that is, they are not that professional. Those were just built in like a PowerPoint. Once you have things built into a database, you can kind of just pull it and ask for a chart and it'll create the chart for you. And then we kind of put those charts into like a PowerPoint and then added the 30% lines. So it's amazing what a little tiny bit of tech can help you do.
Very good. Well, you're going to stick around, won't you? So that if any other questions come up, we can get to you again, because I'm sure as this resonates with more people, more ideas will come. But thank you again, Crystal. This was a fantabulous, not just fantastic, fantabulous presentation. And we're so grateful for people like you who are really doing the work. And we are so grateful to have you with us today. And Don just gave you a hand clap. So
thank you. I'm looking so forward to hearing from some of our other people and what they're doing as well.
And with that note, I'm going to turn it over to Jason, who's going to pull up the presentation from our North Carolina Annual Conference.
Hi, I'm Christine Dodson, and I'm the conference treasurer in the North Carolina Annual Conference. I'm here today with Reverend Laura Dunlap, who serves as our chairperson for our Commission on the Status and Role of Women in the North Carolina Annual Conference. We're thankful that you've asked us to be here today to talk a little bit about how the commission works here in North Carolina, and we are happy to share anything that we've done in the past and kind of where we're going in the future. Our work was kind of reborn in North Carolina several years ago. Our committee had been folded into some other work by other committees, and through some information that we were able to gather with some compensation studies here in North Carolina, kind of sparked a new interest. We had a bishop at the time who was also very supportive of the work of the commission and really helped to push that work through her office, as well as in the conference connectional table here in North Carolina. There was a renewed interest after talking about some of the compensation studies. And we have that information here in the treasurer's office. That's one of the reasons why I was involved in it as well, is we have the compensation information for our clergy persons, and we're able to pull out that gender data, ethnicity data as well, and kind of take a look at it across the spectrum and get a look. And what we saw was that we did have the wage gap. So the wage gap that everybody was talking about everywhere else was right here in North Carolina as well. And so we started tracking that, started sending some information up to our cabinet. They started looking at that, and then we started reporting back. So every few years we would say, here's where we were, here's where we are now. And so the cabinet kind of had that there on their plate. And that really helped to spark that interest and bring our commission on the status and role of women in North Carolina back to the forefront and put that back together. So I know that we've received the reports of that being done on the denominational level. So I certainly commend to you that report that's there at the denominational level, and also anything you can do there in your annual conference. Your benefits officer, your treasurer can help you with that compensation data, can help you pull out that so that you can take a look how that's going there in your own context if you don't have that information already. So our committee was then a few years ago reborn and then had a lot of new activities, and Reverend Laura Dunlap is our chairperson now and can help talk a little bit about how our committee's working out now.
Sure. Thank you, Christine. Right now, we have been meeting ever so often on Zoom, like everyone else with COVID, and having good meetings. Recently, we had a meeting with Dr. Coltrane Battle, who came and helped us consult on our goals that we have for the quadrennium, which I'll get into later on. But in August, we had a symposium with clergy women at Apex United Methodist Church in Apex, North Carolina. And we had clergy women from all different stages of ministry, and at the time our own Bishop Ward, and they shared their challenges, their joys, and their hopes. And we had it in person, and then also with COVID had it online. And such a fruitful time of conversation, of gleaning from each other and hearing each other's stories. And we also celebrated Bishop Hope as she was leaving us at the time with a Red Shoe Award, just to celebrate her ministry and give thanks for all she's done for clergy women to empower and encourage us. But a couple of projects that we have ongoing with COSROW, we have a book club that meets monthly. It meets on Zoom, and then we have a group that meets in person. And we've got a great selection. We're meeting coming up Monday, with a good book. And then we have also a group that's meeting, it's kind of affiliated with COSROW, an anti-racist group that has kind of sprung from the strength of anti-racism in our conference and that focus that we have here in North Carolina Conference. And then also in partnership with the Center for Leadership Excellence, we have encouragements. And encouragements come in the way of a devotion, and that are written by clergy women, and they're for clergy women. They get sent out once a month, and just a short word to empower and encourage us all. So those are some of the things we have going on, with more to do, but grateful for our leadership. We've got a great team of COSROW here and in the North Carolina Conference.
Yes, thank you. Another thing that we did, it's been several years ago now that we put out a lot, was a video. So you will remember there was a video by another group that came out that was words that were said to clergy women that were then read by male clergy persons, and just to kind of see and teach some of the things and some of the challenges that our clergy women face. And so we did that video as well in North Carolina. And it was interesting because it was quite shocking for many of our folks to hear the words that are said and some of the discrimination that is faced by our clergy women all the time. We decided to do that in North Carolina. Our communications office at the conference was very supportive and took on that project. But we decided to do it because we thought it was important that folks in North Carolina see familiar faces, that they hear familiar voices with that, so that it becomes a North Carolina issue. See, when we see folks that we don't know, they're from another denomination or they're from somewhere else, then it's easy for us to say, oh, that happens elsewhere, that happens there. That's not true in North Carolina. So we thought it was important to take a look at what is happening here in North Carolina. So the words that were said were sent in by our clergy women. So they were said to North Carolina clergy women. And then we had those read by other North Carolina clergy persons. And I think that was really helpful so that the folks in our annual conference could see that this is a North Carolina problem as well. It's not somewhere else. It's right here in North Carolina. And I think that helped to make a difference.
I think so too. Yeah. I was struck too by at the video when we were presenting at conference, kind of the shock in conference of the words, people were very surprised that these were the experiences of clergy women. And probably for clergy women, it wasn't that surprising. But it was a great way, kind of like you're saying, to have a homegrown effect in the North Carolina Conference. I think the Lutheran Synod had one in the North Carolina Conference, and North Alabama had one similar to it. But this video just took off. It went viral. It was on local news. It was on national news, and had such a wonderful impact just to get that conversation rolling as it continues to be done. And there's so many different conversations and challenges, right, that clergy women face that we could do similar videos to in any conference. So I encourage folks to think about what are some ways that we can maybe do that if that's something you want to do in your own conference. I know in the North Carolina Conference, to follow up with it, we did a study guide so that if a church wanted to go ahead and talk about this video, because they were already seeing it on the news, to have a discussion guide to kind of bring back the ethics and scriptural references to it and go a little bit deeper with the video. So that was our hope, and that's available online on our COSROW page still to this day if anybody wants to check it out. Also, a kind of another interesting little fact of what happened with the viral aspect of it. I was contacted by a group of Jewish leaders, female leaders in New York, and they were contemplating doing their own video similar to this. And then one of them also happened to be a Navy chaplain reserves. And so she's thinking about doing something similar with the US Navy. So who knows where this will go, how the Spirit will lead, but it's awesome to think about just the ways that people move. And I give thanks to our clergymen who volunteered to do that, right? Because they share those words, and often they don't hear those stories, but they got to take part of it and support our clergy women. So that was great, a great effort. So thanks to our communications team and everybody who came up with that idea too.
Great.
So, yeah.
So that was a big thing that we did here in North Carolina, but there are other plans for how we think this commission will continue on in the future, other things that are going on. Laura, what other future plans do you have and your committee have for the work of COSROW in North Carolina?
Sure. Well, in our next quadrennium, we focused in on three main things. One of those being consistent messaging. We know across the board, even though we're United Methodist, people hear different things in different churches, and we need to have that sense and structure of having consistent messaging with scripture, with what we're teaching about equity for women when it comes to appointment making, representation. And so that effort of consistent messaging is going to be a strong focus for us. Also, we want to just be a resource for clergy women and laity and finding out ways that we can help empower them, find out what their needs are, and find out how we can be a resource, because as we stay connected with so many different folks and have that network, oftentimes we'll hear about things and figure out ways to be able to connect each other, because we are a connectional system. And again, also just to offer support in any way that we can. And so we're looking at different ways that we can be connected, offer consistent messaging, and be a resource to our clergy and laity as well in the coming year. And we've done some great things too. I'll just add on, pre-COVID, we had another partnership with the Center for Leadership Excellence with our BOLD mentoring program. And so this is another thing a conference could do as well, where we partnered up more seasoned clergy women with clergy women who are in different phases of ministry, perhaps not quite as long, and had a wonderful retreat and great speakers. And then they partnered throughout the year and did workshops. And so that was a wonderful time together to kind of grow together and get to know each other as sisters in Christ. And then two, also, we did a workshop, a 2-time workshop for clergy women who were moving into a new appointment. And we had a speaker come in from General Conference and did a wonderful job sharing about, again, the challenges that perhaps we might face as clergy women, how to equip those challenges and to move forward. And then also conference, we were gifted with coaches. It happened to also be a year I was moving, so I benefited from the program too. And it was a great program. In fact, I'm still meeting at times with my coach. So I encourage anybody to think about these different ways, perhaps, that we can move forward and grow together, because there's so much ministry that we can do in our conferences as we get to know the needs of our folks and our clergy women and our laity to just keep on empowering and moving forward.
Yes, thank you. And the role that our clergy women have in the ministry of the United Methodist Church is huge and cannot be quelled, cannot be put down, and has to be put out there so that they can, every clergywoman can live into the ministry that God has called that clergywoman to. So we're grateful for the chance to share with you today, and we look forward to watching other videos and learning new ideas for other things that we can do here in North Carolina as well. So we're really grateful to be in ministry with all of you, and certainly pray God's blessings on your ministry as you proceed. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you, Christine.
That is awesome. So I hope that those two presentations were helpful to all of you. At this time, I'm going to invite Dr. Michaela Bethune to be with us. She is our analyst and researcher and data miner and all things numbers for COSROW. And she is currently an assistant professor in the Department of African American Studies at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. And Dr. Bethune, I'm just gonna let you just share your screen if you'd like, or talk to us a little bit about the salary studies and how you might want to approach that conversation, and then share with everyone, if you have not been in tune with our lunch and learn sessions, you're missing some valuable good information, but you can tune in on November the 11th, where Dr. Michaela will be again presenting on the salary studies, looking at jurisdictional and annual conference data. The conversation was just so loaded the last time, we just couldn't get to all the questions, and she couldn't even finish all of her presentation. So we do need to go back and get into that on the 11th, and I encourage you to come because it's good stuff. All righty, Dr. Bethune.
Sweet deal. Thank you so much, Reverend Pernell, for that introduction. And I just have to say, I am on fire. I'm so inspired by all that has been shared today, to learn about the rich and long history of the work for equity, gender equity in this denomination. I'm so inspired to see all of the innovative work that has been done to push the margins and to make more room for women in ministry and women within church functioning. And so I'm thrilled to be in a lineup of this conversation today. And I just want to share a little bit about my work in partnership with GCSRW for the past 5 years and what is ahead. So before I continue, I do want to acknowledge that my conversation, my dialogue today is happening from a location. I'm in the catchment area of the California Pacific Conference, where I am a new settler residing in traditional and unceded indigenous territories of the Gabrielino and Tongva indigenous folks. In this work that we do, this intersectional work, we should strive to understand the ways in which histories of domination and histories of colonizations have also helped to shape the conditions and experiences of women in the ministry, and that we may see the deepening and the exacerbation of some of these issues at intersections of race, ethnicity, and gender. And so I wanted to take a moment to amplify that in our consciousness as well. We understand that this work is something to be done on all fronts, and that as ancestor Audre Lorde informs in terms of my work, until we're all free, none of us are free. And so I've really been inspired by hearing notions that this work that's being done in this conference, even though it centers the experiences of women, we acknowledge and we understand that it truly is an act of liberation. It truly is an act as a true disciple of Christ to make this world more free, this work more free for all people, regardless of gender. So I'm fired up and ready to go. This is a very fresh pour. It feels like church on a Saturday. So I just wanted to start with a statement of gratitude. Now, my name is Dr. Michaela Bethune, and I have been working in partnership with GCSRW for about 5 years now. My work has spanned looking at compensation disparities along lines of gender, but I've also done some work in partnership with COSROW to look at the representation of of clergy women and lay folk as delegates at the conference. And so issues of representation, issues of disparities in compensation, and also just happy to support other conversations that are happening, other types of work that is being done. I've been inspired to hear of all of your work in indicting language and understanding how language and how our dynamics, the culture of the denomination, the culture within our conferences really is a reflection and an influence on how processes and procedures are structured around it. And so I am honored to be in service to that work as well, to the extent that is possible. And I hope that you all consider me a resource to you as I am connected to COSROW and to the denomination in other capacities. So let's get to the compensation study, the salary study. This 2020 data that we're using and the 2021 reports that are coming out from our salary study is really a recapitulation. It's a revisitation of analyses that we did using 2015 data and in a series of reports from 2017. So what we were hoping to do in 2017 was really to establish a baseline understanding, a snapshot of the disparities at the time, which was a reflection of 2015 values, and to illuminate those disparities coupled with a call to action for people to pay attention, for people to go back to their respective conferences, their respective jurisdictions, their local churches, and really be equipped with the information that they needed to be able to advocate for equity and for equality. And so we, in 2015, we discovered, despite decades of work of COSROW, decades of work done by agents of equity in local churches, local congregations, local communities on behalf of striving for equality for women, there were still glaring disparities in compensation. The scope of these studies have been focused on full-time clergy. And so we don't even understand the actual true extent of the disparity that exists in all levels of ministry and of functioning within the denomination. But we do have a proxy, we do have something, a platform to start with by looking at full-time, 100% effort clergy. And so there's two major areas that we look at. We look at the representation of women among clergy, and when we look at the compensation patterns between men and women and clergy. So I'll start first with a conversation about representation. The representation issue, just to echo some of the insights that Don and that Bishop Sharon were sharing, this is a long time issue. We're talking over the course of 50 years of COSROW functioning and a bit over, I guess, 45 years of women being ordained in the denomination. Women are still drastically underrepresented. So some of the earlier numbers that we shared in our first report was that, in 1992, this takes us back about 30 years, women comprised 11% of full-time clergy. And then when we there was another report, I think, that came out in 2002, where the representation of women increased from that 11% in 1992 to 19% in 2002. In 2015, despite women representing over half of congregations within the denomination, women still represented only 28% of full-time clergy. And that is when we issued really this call to action for there to be some meaningful change. Well, let's fast forward 5 years to 2020. We saw in our data that women still lagged behind men in representation and had only increased from 28% representation in 2015 to 32% in 2020. So what we kind of get from this information is really trend analysis. We get an understanding of how slow progress is really moving across time. And with that, given what has already been done, given the interventions or non-interventions that have happened, we kind of get an understanding of the pace of progress. And I don't know if I speak for everyone when I say this, but this is insufficient. This is not progress. This is gradual movement that tends with the trend that is represented in larger society. But this does not seem to be progress made through systemic intentional efforts to remedy a disparity issue that we acknowledge has been built into the structure of the denomination. The fact that women were excluded from ordination, the fact that women have been systematically suppressed through appointment processes and so forth. So I don't know, this salary study in 2020 should really light a fire to people who are in positions to make a change. Again, the goal here is to give folks the information that they need to be able to advocate. And we've really seen some wonderful examples today of either folks who have used this data and these studies or who have conducted work on their own to be able to advocate for themselves and for other women in their respective conferences. So the second area that we focus on in our salary study is the extent to which disparities exist between men and women. I want to acknowledge, especially at this sort of contentious moment in denominational change and in ideological change, that I am consistently using language that aligns with a binary that shapes conditions within this denomination. So the fact that I'm using language, men and women, it's not me taking the position of erasing people who identify with other gender identities, our non-binary siblings, our non-gender conforming siblings who are answering the call to ministry. So please forgive if it seems that I'm using language that erases people and souls. I'm simply reflecting the way that the system has structured the data. And that's a whole nother conversation that can happen at another time, but I want to definitely name that I'm simply reflecting, honestly, the systemic structure that perpetuates this sort of dynamic for our siblings, and am allied in an effort and in solidarity to affirm their lives and their existence and their contributions to ministry. So with that being said, I want to illuminate some of what we've discovered in our salary study, the first salary study, and then to give a teaser, if you will, about our next Lunch and Learn and what we'll discover there. So in the first salary study, I encourage people to definitely go visit it. I think that Jen shared a link to it where you will see some of the disparities of representation by membership type, and by jurisdiction. And then in terms of compensation, we see that there are still persistent disparities in how men and women are compensated in virtually all types of compensation that we were able to focus on in this study. So what we looked at were data, which were really comprehensive data that came out of WestPath, which is the agency that is over maintaining the financial and administration information from the General Council on Finance Administration. So we get really kind of a very full data set and a comprehensive understanding within US jurisdictions on the salary that is afforded to clergy members. We had information on the housing allowance. So clergy receive as a part of compensation package a salary, and then one of the two following other types of compensation, housing allowance or parsonage. So we made sure to parse out which type of additional compensation people were getting. And then lastly, we created a figure called total compensation. So that's where we added people's salary and housing allowance, or either people's salary and parsonage amount. And what we discovered was, like in 2015, women still received significantly less compensation in all of those types than did men in 2020. Now, we did see a marginal decrease in the disparity, a marginal difference in the disparity. When we factored for other factors like how many years of service clergy had, when we also took into account, people's different jurisdictions, that was an attempt to kind of adjust for cost of living. And when we accounted for, oh, my mind. Hold on a second, it's coming to me. When we also accounted for, age, years of service, membership type, and jurisdiction, women in 2020 made on average about $3,500 in total compensation, less than clergymen. So when we break that out by the different compensation types, with those factors considered, women made $2,700 less in salary. On average, women made $1,600 less in housing allowance than did men, factoring for age, years of service, membership type, and jurisdiction. Parsonage amount, women made on average $500 less. And again, that total number was an average of $3,500 less. Now, in order to compare, to see the trend that was happening from 2015 to 2020, I just want to have us think for a second about how we define progress. That total compensation difference that was observed in 2015 was about $5,000. Over the course of 5 years, we've lessened that disparity to $3,500. But do we count that as, like, how do we qualify progress? That's been a question that I want to have people ruminate on whenever we look at this data. And the second question is, to what extent is the improvements that we see made a function of intentional efforts? Because I really believe if there is a systemic effort to pay attention and to really put into action an intervention upon this particular disparity, that we could actually see more equitable, more equal, and eventually more equitable treatment and conditions for women and the denomination. And so I want to wrap up my time here, sort of giving a teaser to the fact that we do have an upcoming Lunch and Learn. We've had a Lunch and Learn that focused on the first salary study that was a sort of general summary of the entire denomination or US jurisdictions and the salary and representation disparities. In November, we will deepen our discussion and really drill down to the jurisdictional and the annual conference level to look at disparities in compensation or representation. So attendees at these Lunch and Learns will have an opportunity to look with me at this data and to ask specific questions in regard to how to activate these insights in a way that allows you to advocate for yourself at the annual conference level. Another benefit of attending this upcoming Lunch and Learn is that I'm also going to be offering a couple of strategies about how to critically read data. So again, if, for example, when we're talking about how do we define progress, do we say reducing the disparity by $1,500 is progress? Or do we say having a disparity that exists to the tune of $3,500 is injustice that needs to be addressed? Like how does data speak to us in different ways that helps enable us to frame our advocacy and to frame our policy making in order to achieve the objectives of equality? So I am wondering now where I am situated with time, and also want to take a breath if I have more time to see if there are any immediate questions. But I think I've reached the end of my time here. But thank you all so much for this space. If there is time, I'm happy to answer questions, and I'll also be present in the chat to see if there are questions there. So thank you so much, and I'll stop talking. All right.
You, Michaela, you actually have a couple extra minutes if there are any questions. Thank you so much for being with us. Again, when we had our Lunch and Learn sessions, they were really, really pretty intense, and there are tons and tons of questions. So I know that many of you are probably thinking about how you might be able to use this information at your annual conference level. I think what has happened after the first salary study done in 2015, it's prompted many of you to look even more into your annual conference numbers. And that was what we greatly appreciate, which was why it was so wonderful to have Christine Dodson say, you can get this data from your conference treasurer or your conference benefits if you don't have access to it. Some annual conferences put all of this on their websites, or have in the past, as they've done in Eastern Pennsylvania. And therefore, when they've done salary studies, it was not challenging for them to grab the data. So they took what we had produced from the jurisdictional level and then brought that in comparison to where they were at the annual conference level. So these salary studies are happening everywhere. And if you're not doing them now, we encourage you to get busy. And if you need our help, then let us know. Right now, if there aren't any questions, I'm trying to look through the chat. I don't see, oh, okay. Jen has posted the salary study and the lunch and learn. So we hope to see you all on the 11th. I think what I'd like us to do before we move forward is to take a quick 5-minute break, just so that you can stretch your legs and grab another cup of coffee or a bottle of water and come back at about 12, 17-ish, 18-ish. I think Jason will give us a countdown on the clock. And then when we open up, we will start immediately with Becky. Becky Posey Williams, she is the Senior Director of Sexual Ethics and Advocacy for our agency. And she will go over getting ready, get set, and go for the journey continues. Please see you soon.
Numbers too big to ignore, and I know too much to go back and pretend, 'cause I've heard it all before, and I've been down there on the floor, and no one's ever gonna keep me down again. Yes, I'm wise, but it's wisdom born of pain. Yes, I paid the price, but look how much I gained. If I have to, I can do anything. I am strong, I am woman. You can bend but never break me, 'cause it only serves to make me more determined to achieve my final goal. And I come back even stronger. I'm not a novice any longer, 'cause you deepened the conviction in my soul. Yes, I'm wise, but it's wisdom born of pain. Yes, I paid the price, but look how much I gained. If I have to, I can do anything. I am strong, I don't need to fight. Stand face to face. And you present your case. Yes, I know. You keep telling me that you love it. And I really do want to believe. But did you think I'd just accept you in blind faith? Oh, sure, baby. Anything to please you. But you better be good to me. That's how it's gotta be now. 'Cause I don't have the time for your overloaded lies. And you better be good to me. Be good to me. And I really don't see why it's so hard to be good to me. And you know, I don't understand why it's so plain that you can't be good to me. Why can't you be good to me? Be good. Be good to me. 'Cause I don't have a use for what you loosely call the truth. And I don't have the time for your overloaded lies. So you better be good to me. Be good to me. Be good. Be good to me. 'Cause I don't have no use for what you loosely call the truth. And I don't have the time for your overloaded lies. You better be good to me. Good to me. Better be good to me. Be good. Be good to me. Why can't you be good to me? Why can't you be?
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you were able to move around a little bit. I stood and did some stretching so that I can kind of move around a little bit for the afternoon. Well, we're going to move right into our ready, set, go section for the journey. I hope this journey today has been helpful and fruitful to many of you. And as we move out of this session, as we come closer to the end, we will be having some additional follow-up sessions to dig a little deeper in some of the information that we've learned about. I think that might be helpful for some of you. But at this time, I'm going to turn everything over to Becky Williams. She is my colleague here at COSROW, and she will share more about the work in her area, sexual ethics and advocacy. And thank you, Becky, for being with us today.
Absolutely, Pam. This is my pleasure. It's been a great time together all morning. So hope to add just a little bit of information for you around my work with sexual ethics within our denomination. So just a quick introduction. I think I have met many of you, but for those I have not, my name is Becky Posey Williams. I serve as the Senior Director for Sexual Ethics and Advocacy. That position involves quite a bit of information, so I'm going to do my best to condense it down for you and make it as simple as possible. The purpose of my position is to help the United Methodist Church to have resources for prevention of sexual misconduct within our denomination, as well as resources when there is a complaint of sexual misconduct filed and our response needs to be the highest quality and the best response in every absolute case that is brought forward, and not just one here or there, but every one. Additionally, our agency offers a confidential toll-free phone number for anyone who may need information or support as they begin navigating through our system to consider filing a complaint or actually filing a complaint. And we also offer a website, umsexualethics.org. This next slide will show you just a little more breakdown of specifically what I am responsible for. Jason, it's not doing what it's supposed to do. Jason, are you there?
Oh, sorry, I was double muted. Yep, click on the slide and then click
Okay,
one more
I just
time.
got it. It did it one more time. Okay, thank you. Oh. I mentioned that we are responsible for prevention. Actually, the Book of Discipline says we are to eradicate sexism in the church and society. So that's quite a daunting mandate. And in breaking it down, prevention is a huge piece of that. If we can weave prevention materials into the fabric of the United Methodist Church, then I believe we can move in a direction where one day this position is no longer required. A couple of curriculums that we have developed in the spirit of prevention. The first one I would lift up to you is the Way of Integrity. This is free for the asking or for the downloading. It is a 4-part study. It is grounded in scripture and encourages a lot of reflective questions on behalf of the individual participating in the study. You know, one question is, can a person determine what your values are based upon the way they see you live life? The other is the #MeToo toolkit, which we put together in 2018 following the onset of that movement. It is still relative material, and I would encourage you to check out both of these and introduce them to people within your conference. The second area of my work involves training. Some of you may have participated in some trainings that I have presented around the denomination. Those are oftentimes clergy sexual ethics or boundaries and integrity in ministry training. I also do trainings for individual cabinets at the request of the bishop's office in helping cabinets better understand exactly what their next steps will be in a good response to sexual misconduct complaints. Additionally, I provide training for those annual conferences whose bishops choose to develop and organize a team that will go into work with congregations and staff and any others who are affected when a case of sexual misconduct is confirmed. And oftentimes, if it is perpetrated by clergy leadership, that person is removed from that position. So these teams are strictly for healing. They are not part of the investigation. They are a tremendous resource to have in your annual conference. And if your annual conference does not have one, I really encourage you to take the initiative to talk about how that could be developed in your neck of the woods. The other training I do each year involves the new district superintendent and director of connectional ministries orientation, which is held in collaboration through the General Board of Higher Ed and Ministry and Discipleship Ministries. Much of my work also involves myself in the role of a consultant. That consultation is usually taking place with bishops, district superintendents, chairs of staff parish relations committees, and sometimes the chairs of the Board of Ordained Ministry. It's really interesting. I'm never surprised when I receive a call and the simple request is, help me determine what the best next steps can be in our response to the concern or the complaint that has been brought to our attention. This consultation is provided worldwide throughout our denomination. So basically what this means is that every jurisdiction in the United States, and almost all central conferences have reached out for training, consultation, or advocacy during my time in this position with COSROW. So if you, by any means, and I don't think any of you would ever think this, but if there's anyone in your annual conference who thinks that your jurisdiction is immune to this issue of sexual misconduct, you can tell them that you know for a fact today it is not. Advocacy is provided by me when a person reaches out to me needing more information, needing some support in determining whether to file a formal complaint, or after a formal complaint has been filed and they have been met with silence, they have not received information from the bishop's office in a timely manner, or they simply aren't sure what they need to do to prepare for a meeting that they've been asked to attend, things of that nature. And I will talk in just a moment about a new resource that was developed for this very reason. To my knowledge, I'm the only person in our denomination worldwide that fulfills this position in terms of as a staff person. That 1-800 number is on this slide now, 1-800-523-8390. As people actively involved in COSROW on the ground in your annual conferences, I really would want to know that you know that number and that you have that number, and that it would be a resource you would provide as often as need be. Resource development, I mentioned the prevention pieces above, and I want to share with you the excitement around a new resource which we have just developed, and it was actually launched about 2 weeks ago. I'm going to, well, there it is right there. Can everyone see that on my screen, or?
Yes, we can.
Okay, well, wow, thank you. So this is the new resource that we have developed. The title of it is Do No More Harm. And I want to tell you that the reason we decided on that particular title is because this resource grew and was born out of the stories that I have heard over the past almost 8 years now from people who have thought about and or have filed a formal complaint of sexual misconduct within their annual conference. And oftentimes what I would hear would be that additional trauma had been experienced by the person who filed the complaint. And almost always the stories of that trauma centered around invitations from leadership to second guess one's decision to come forward with allegations, or to minimize the seriousness and the harm of the allegations that are brought forth, or actually to be silent about the allegations that were brought forth. And it was not uncommon for me to hear complainants say, I feel like the harm inflicted upon me by the church in its response was as bad as, and sometimes it felt more harmful than the experience of the sexual misconduct. So I want to walk you through this real quickly. I'm not going to go through the entire course, but I just wanted to introduce you to it. And I want to encourage you to prioritize time in your schedule. And I know we're all busy, and I know we have more than we have time to do. And I'm still asking you, please make a priority to go through this entire course. I want to know that you are familiar with this course. And then after I do this, I want to share with you what my hope is that you will do with this information. So if we click, oh, that did not work, Jason.
Yes,
Okay.
Becky, how can I help you?
No way, I just needed to say that so you could hear that and I can think my way through this.
Okay.
Okay. All right, let's see if this works now. So you can access this resource through our website at umsexualethics.org, or you can actually just put in your browser donomoreharm.org. So this is what it looks like when you click the begin button. It will take you directly to the welcome. We have a welcome video from our president of our board of directors, Bishop Tracy Smith Malone. The confidential 1-800 number is throughout this resource so that people will have it the minute they begin going through it. The second session is titled You're Not Alone, and you will notice that the spirit of this resource is for those people who are considering filing a formal complaint or have filed a formal complaint. People, this has been a weak link in our response system. We have not been uniform throughout our denomination in making sure the complainant had the resources they needed to be informed, had the resources they needed to not have to walk alone, and had that at their fingertips. And so again, that's the spirit of the development of this resource. So there's a couple of flyers that can be downloaded by people who are using this resource. There's one right there, the sexual ethics flyer. What do I do now? These 3 cards: find people to support you, anticipate uncertainty, name what your desired outcome is. And so on anticipate uncertainty, you just flip that card and this is what it says. Know up front that a complaint process is complicated and may take a while to resolve. And that's at the beginning of this resource, and people need to know that. Using this guide, you can bookmark the page to return to it very easily. Let's just jump down one more. Here are the participants who are typically involved in any complaint that takes place. You can click on the question mark and it will tell you information about each one of these roles. You can go click right here, find out who your bishop is. You can find out which annual conference you're in if you do not know that. If you're outside the US, you can determine which annual conference or regional area that you are in. So I will, I'll just do one more real quickly, and so that you get an idea of what is in here. We have videos from,
Hey, Becky, I'm sorry to jump
Yes.
in here.
Okay.
Because of the resolution, let me have Jen bring it up on her screen.
Oh, it's not showing up
and
well?
then we can see all those resources. So stand by for that. There we go. Thank you, Jen. All right, Becky, can you see that on
Okay.
your screen?
Sure, I can.
Okay, very good.
Okay. So again, we don't have the time to go through the entire resource, but I certainly do hope that you will prioritize your time. What Jen has up right there, I can tell you right now from my experience that your cabinet in your annual conference would like to have that one page. And Jen, if you'll scroll down, I believe you'll see the summary. Click on the summary, please. Will it open? It's okay. It's okay if it doesn't. But if you, when you're actually visiting this resource, if you will click on the complaint process summary and flow chart, every role, there it is. There's all the roles. And it tells exactly what every role does throughout the response process. I will say, and if Bishop Rader is still on, she might know this certainly better than I, but certainly in my time of working with the church, we have never had this written material in one place that condenses it into 2 pages like this. So again, if your cabinet can get their hands on these 2 sheets of paper, then I think they would probably be very interested in exploring this entire resource. When we began developing this resource, what we heard from assistants to bishops, what we heard from DSs, what we heard from counsel for the church, what we heard from bishops, what we heard from everyone who has an active role in the response is, if you can give us something that will help us understand the complaint process simply, because it's a complex process that could make our job easier, we want it. We want to have it. So again, COSROW folks, I'm asking you, I might say I'm begging you, would you please get this information to your cabinets? So thanks, Jen. Okay, uh-oh. There we go. Am I still on?
You
Hello?
sure are.
Okay, thank you. All of a sudden I thought, I think I just signed off the entire
No,
Zoom.
the light's still on you. Keep dancing.
Right, great, thank you, thank you. So this is why you are important, people. My heart is warmed, quite honestly, when I think about each of you out in the annual conferences who are our point person, as well as your annual conference point person when it comes to issues involving sexual misconduct in the United Methodist Church. Sexism exists in our UMC. You know that. I know that. Sexual misconduct exists in our United Methodist Church. You know that. And I know that. And people, I will tell you, the trench is not very deep of people who want to do this work. And so I am turning to you. I am leaning on you to carry the mantle in your annual conference. So often complainants have no one to turn to. They need a connection to resources in their annual conference. And that is a minimum standard that we must provide. all the time, not just every now and then, but all the time. I invite you to think about how you can give intentional attention to your annual conference's website and printed materials that give information on sexual misconduct and where to report. Before I do a training, I always visit an annual conference's website. It is a rare occasion that it's easy for me to find a sexual ethics, sexual misconduct policy on an annual conference's website. And if I've got the time, I can dig and dig and dig and dig and eventually find it. But it is not user-friendly in terms of putting that material out there where people can easily find it. I'm asking you to recruit at least one person from each district to participate in a training to become a support person for complainants. In the Do No More Harm resource, you will hear videos from two people, Christina Gonzalez from Pacific Northwest and Kevin Nelson from the Northeastern jurisdiction, who have served as support persons for complainants. We are putting together a training curriculum as I speak that will be used to train individuals to become those support persons. We need your help in recruiting those people. There is absolutely no way I can do this on my own. And at this point, let me apologize for not mentioning to you that Reverend Meg Lassier served as the project manager for the development of that resource, Do No More Harm. She and I worked very closely together on that, and what a privilege and honor to get to work with her and the denomination receive the fruits of her labor. So I'll leave you with this quote, which is in the Do No More Harm resource. It's a Martin Luther King Jr. Quote that says, "You don't have to see the whole staircase, just take the first step." And I just want to say a heartfelt thank you to each of you for taking that first step when you said yes to your annual conference in working locally for COSROW where you are. So we appreciate it. I appreciate it. And know that I'm here just a call away or an email away, and I'm happy to help you in any way I can. Again, please share this Do No More Harm resource with your cabinet. Ask your district superintendents to share it with every staff parish chair in their district, and see what you can do to recruit at least one person from each of your districts to join in a training to become a support person for a complainant going through a complaint process. So I believe that's it for me. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take those.
Thank you so much, Becky, my dear friend and colleague. That was wonderful. The information you shared is really, really valuable. And I hope all of you will think about the things she asked and will look at that sexual ethics website. It's amazing. And the information is just so easily digestible. You will really be glad you did. And of course, you are looking for help. So I do hope you'll hear from someone after today saying, I've got a name for you of someone who might be willing to serve in this capacity in our annual conference. Thanks again.
Thank you, Pam, for the invitation.
You're welcome. I'm going to turn this over to our colleague, Jen Meadows. She is our communications director, and she will share a little bit about your GPS for the journey, navigating our website.
Thank you, Pam. So I am been the one that's been blowing up the chat with all of the links. So I want to share my screen to show some of the places that you can find all of these resources that have been referenced. I know there's been a couple of questions about where can we find some videos and whatnot. We are on YouTube and we post everything onto our YouTube channel. And you can subscribe, you will see right here. If you search GCSRW, our channel will come up. I will also make sure to drop this in the chat. Specifically, I know we have this expansive language piece that we put together 2 years ago that shares all of these different names that we find in the Bible for God. I want to direct your attention to that. And also our Lunch and Learns do get uploaded. You will see right here, and I'll be creating a playlist that's specifically for Lunch and Learn. And if you attended our Women's Leadership Summit as well, on the back end right now, we are plugging in and creating a Women's Leadership Summit playlist where you'll be able to go back and experience all of the resources and worship from that. And if you were unable to attend, you'll be able to find it here on our YouTube in November. So again, I'll drop this once I'm done speaking, but find us and subscribe to us on YouTube so you're the first to know when we upload. All of the resources that you will find, if you come to our homepage and go to resources and then curriculum, again, you'll see, go down to resources and curriculum. You will be able to find all of the resources that we have referenced, including Do No More Harm, Responding Well to Sexual Misconduct. This is great for district superintendents. We have a power brochure for sexual misconduct as well. Becky and Dawn have both mentioned the Way of Integrity. You can find the Leaders and Participants Guide, the Me Too Toolkit, God of the Bible, and then Women Called to Ministry isn't translated in multiple languages, and you will be able to see they are all here. So again, you will find that resources curriculum. I also was dropping a lot of articles from our Women by the Numbers, and you will see it is here. To find that, you go to Monitoring and History, then Women by the Numbers. Again, Monitoring and History, Women by the Numbers. And once you're here, it shows the top articles first. So you'll see Dr. Bethune's salary studies from 2020 are the first. If there's something specific that you're looking for, we do have them indexed by topic here on the right-hand side. So if you're particularly interested about General Conference, delegation breakdowns, you can see that we have all of these here that you're able to look and search by your topic that you're interested in. So I'll make sure to drop a link to that as well. I also wanted to bring attention to the AC COSROW resource page. And you'll see here on the website, there is an AC COSROW drop-down menu, and you'll go to AC COSROW resources. And you'll be able to find some resources. And I know one that is very popular that you'll scroll down for, we have our monitoring form. I know Indiana has mentioned that they have done their own monitoring. This is a good example if you're wanting to build one for your own annual conference. And there's also some other forums here that you may want to look at, but I wanted to bring your attention to, again, AC COSROW resources. If you want to be one of the first to hear about what we're doing at GCSRW, we do have a newsletter, and you can subscribe to it by going to news and then newsletter. And then all of you need to do is input your email address and your name here, and then you will get by every other month we send out a full newsletter, and we will send out the occasional updates about Lunch and Learns and trainings like this. So I will also drop my email in the chat. So if there's someone on your AC COSROW that you just want me to add to the newsletter, send me their contact information and I will get you subscribed. I shared earlier Bishop Rader's tribute that she wrote for Carolyn Oler and Bishop Shabana. We have a blog that you'll find at gcsrw.wordpress.com, where we have a lot of our blogs will be posted. And again, I just want to remind you, Sexual Ethics, you go to umsexualethics.org, but I did want to bring attention to an exciting collaboration. GCSRW is working with United Methodist Communications to have our websites moved over to Resource UMC. And so this Sexual Ethics website was also launched alongside of the Do No More Harm resource, but is now on Resource UMC. And we're very excited for what they have been able to do and this collaboration and moving forward with our agency site. And of course, once that transition happens, don't worry, we will have redirects in place So when you go to gcsrw.org, it will take you to the new site, so you don't have to worry about that. So, and then again, I'm just going to bring attention, you can access Do No More Harm either through donomoreharm.org, or if you come to the sexual ethics website, you'll be able to find it right here on the homepage. So I will drop all of that information. I know it was a lot, along with my email within the chat, but I'm also going to drop where you can find us on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And I'm sure those of you who are on Twitter for United Methodist events, our COSROW Twitter is very active while we're at events and providing monitoring information. But we also post updates for Instagram and Facebook regularly. So I will drop all of that here. So I apologize in advance for filling up the chat with all this information, but I just want to make sure that you have it. And thank you. Pam, do you want to take it over?
Sure, sure. Thanks so much, Jen, for sharing that information. I know that some of you may not be on our email list, and so please make sure you get Jen's email and send her a quick note. I know, Jason, I guess you'd have to turn over the registration list so we can be sure we have all the emails of everyone who participated, so that we can make sure we get them one way or the other. And you can always reach out if you to me or Jen if you need to get further information about any of our resources, or Becky as well. I am going to just say my thank yous now and let everyone who's been here know that I so appreciate your time this morning. And we look forward to doing some follow-up sessions, which we will definitely make sure you know about, especially if you're listed in our email distribution list. I want to turn it over now to our General Secretary, Dawn Wiggins-Hare, who will close us out and provide her comments and a prayer. Dawn?
All righty then. Well, I want to say a great big thank you to Pam and Jason and Jen and Becky and Crystal and Bishop Sharon and Dr. Michaela and Christine and Laura and everyone who was a participant and offered such a wonderful, rich program today. While we are closing out, do me a favor, enter in the chat your annual conference so we can see who is represented, what area of the Methodism is with us on this training today. I just kind of like a summary of that because I'm seeing names. Oh, thank you. North Carolina, North Texas, Iowa, excellent. Greater New Jersey, West Virginia, Minnesota, North Alabama, Western PA, Holston, South Carolina, Mississippi. Oh, this is just Peninsula Delaware. This is just awesome. Thank you so much for being with us. I did want to note that we're going to be preparing a survey to send out to everyone who registered for today. And we're going to ask in that survey for your help in what you would like for us to cover in the future. East Ohio, there you go. What you would like for us to cover in the future. If there's anything that we can do to help you, please help us frame our future trainings, our future lunch and learns. Arizona, wow, anything that we can do to help you, we very much want to do. I also wanted to remind you that the next lunch and learn is November the 11th, and it will be at noon Central Time, but be on the lookout for that. And that's about it. So with that, I'm going to steal a Thomas Morton prayer that just happens to be in front of me right here. So, Northern Illinois, excellent. So would you join me? God, I have no idea where I'm going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end. Nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I am following your will does not mean that I'm actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope I have that desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore, I will trust you always, though I may seem to be lost, and in the shadow of death, I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. Amen. And Godspeed until we can be together again, all in the same room. Thank you so much.